I chose education over marriage and my father disowned me. Now he needs my help. Some choices change your life forever. Some pull you into the darkness, and once you step in, there's no turning back. Ella Gray sat at her desk, the steady hum of the city outside her apartment muffling into the silence around her. It was a rare, quiet evening, one of those fleeting moments where life seemed almost still. Yet a strange feeling lingered in the air. Something was off. She stared at the folder before her, a typical case, or so she thought. A missing person report. Yet, as she flipped through the details, an unusual pattern began to emerge. The case was too polished, too straightforward. No heartfelt appeals from family, no traces of urgency, just plain clinical facts, devoid of emotion, almost too precise. Her fingers hovered over the photograph of the missing woman, a young woman, her smile frozen in time, but Ella's instincts whispered that there was something buried beneath the surface. Her gaze drifted to the case number and suddenly, a familiar unease crept in. She had seen this before. A sudden rush of apprehension gripped her, but before she could process it, the phone rang. The voice on the other end was sharp and detached. "You need to look deeper, Ella. There are things they don't want you to find." The words hung in the air, an eerie echo that sent a shiver down her spine. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was standing at the edge of something vast, something dark. This case wasn't just another puzzle. It was the first thread in a tangled web, one that could unravel everything she thought she knew. The air was heavy with tension, and Ella's paranoia was reaching its breaking point. She could no longer tell who was trying to help her and who was working against her. No one seemed completely reliable, and the walls felt like they were closing in around her. As she pored over the financial records again, a chilling realization took hold. Lena Dalton wasn't just a victim. She had unknowingly played a role in one of Stone's business dealings. The web Ella had stumbled into was far more twisted than a simple missing person case. This was a conspiracy that stretched into the highest levels of power, and someone was willing to kill to keep it in the shadows. The weight of danger pressed down on her. She wasn't just investigating a missing woman anymore. She was ripping open the cracks in a system that had been ignored for far too long. But what was the endgame of this conspiracy? Who else was involved? And how far would they go to keep their secrets? There was only one certainty now. There was no turning back. Ella couldn't shake the feeling that someone was always one step ahead. After a week of digging, she had finally connected the dots between Marcus Stone, Lena Dalton, and a shadowy network of offshore accounts. But just as she was about to share her findings with Max, the danger she had been anticipating finally became a reality. It happened late at night. Ella had parked her car in a dark alley near the real estate firm that seemed to be the nerve center of Stone's operations. She was following a hunch, an instinct that something big was about to happen. Her intuition had never failed her before, but tonight it did. As she stepped out of her car, a prickle of unease crawled up her spine. She wasn't alone. A figure emerged from the shadows, his face hidden beneath the brim of a hat. Ella tensed, her fingers automatically moving toward the small gun tucked beneath her jacket. The man didn't say a word. Instead, he lunged at her, gripping her arm with inhuman strength and yanking her into the darkness. She fought, kicking wildly, but his grip was like iron shackles. "You shouldn't have come here," he growled. Ella's heart slammed against her ribs. This wasn't some random thug. This man knew exactly who she was, and he wasn't here to talk. Before she could react, the roar of an engine split the silence. Her head snapped around just in time to see a black SUV speeding toward her. Adrenaline took over. She twisted out of the man's grasp, slamming her elbow into his ribs, and launched herself toward her car. But the SUV was already closing in. There was no time to think. She barely managed to dive into the driver's seat, yanking the door shut just as the SUV collided with her car, sending a shockwave through her body. The man from the alley was still coming, but before he could reach her, Ella threw the car into reverse, tires screeching as she shot backward onto the street. The SUV followed. Her pulse pounded as she swerved, dodging obstacles with razor-sharp precision. The chase wove through the tight city streets, Ella pushing the car to its limits. The SUV was relentless, but she wasn't done yet. With a sudden sharp turn, she barreled down a side alley, her wheels skidding dangerously close to a brick wall. The SUV hesitated, just enough for her to take the lead. As the distance grew, a sliver of relief crept in, but the thought remained, cold and certain. This was only the beginning. Ella sat at her desk, her mind a maelstrom of thoughts. The danger from last night hadn't passed. It had deepened the abyss of uncertainty. She had expected a complicated conspiracy, but this was more than she had ever imagined. As she pieced together the evidence, the names, the transactions, the shell companies, something began to take shape. But the truth was almost too disturbing to accept. Among the financial records, one detail had slipped past her until now. A series of transactions linked to a well-known charity, an organization that claimed to serve the city's most vulnerable. On the surface, the charity was untouchable, tax-exempt, widely respected, and beyond scrutiny. But as Ella cross-referenced its financials with Stone's businesses, she found the truth. The charity was a front for laundering money, not just for Marcus Stone, but for a much larger, deeply entrenched network of corruption. Marcus Stone wasn't just a shady businessman. He was a key player in a system designed to manipulate public perception while funneling millions into illicit activities. The realization sent an icy shiver down her spine. This wasn't just about wealth or influence. This was about control, over institutions, over people, over the very city she had fought to protect. And Lena Dalton? She wasn't just another missing woman. She had been used as a pawn, caught in a game she never even knew she was playing. But the real betrayal cut far deeper. Someone close to Ella had been working against her from the very beginning, feeding information to Stone, sabotaging her investigation, someone she had trusted. This was the moment of reckoning. Ella's resolve hardened. They had tried to silence her, but she was done playing defense. The only way to end this was to expose it all. And if they were going to come for her again, they'd better be ready for a fight. Ella stood at the edge of the rooftop, the city stretching below her in a blur of lights. The air was thick with tension, and her pulse pounded as she faced Marcus Stone. His cold eyes gleamed in the dim light, and his voice was smooth but lethal. "You've been a thorn in my side for too long, Ella," he said, his tone dripping with venom. "You've exposed things that should have stayed hidden. Now you've gone too far." Ella felt the weight of the situation tightening around her chest. She had come this far, uncovered the depths of his corruption. But now, standing eye to eye with the man who pulled the strings, the odds seemed overwhelmingly stacked against her. She was alone. Max couldn't make it in time, and everyone she'd trusted had betrayed her in some way. But this was it. This was the moment she had to finish it. Stone's bodyguards encircled her, cutting off any chance of escape. He took a slow step forward, a smug smile on his lips. "You think you can stop me? You're nothing but a pest." The temptation to give up, to walk away, clawed at Ella. But then she remembered Lena Dalton, the woman whose life had been shattered, like so many others who had been caught in Stone's web of lies. Her blood ran cold, but the fire in her heart blazed brighter. With a quick motion, she threw a small device to the ground. The explosion was small but loud enough to disrupt the guards. They faltered for a moment, and in that moment, Ella lunged at Stone, knocking him off balance. They struggled, rolling across the rooftop, but Stone recovered first and grabbed her by the throat, lifting her off her feet. She gasped for air, her vision darkening, but her hands found the hidden blade in her jacket. With every ounce of strength she had left, she drove it into his side. Stone roared in pain, releasing his grip on her. For a split second, Ella thought it was over. But as Stone staggered back, bleeding and furious, she saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. This wasn't about power for him anymore. It was about staying alive. And that's when she made her choice. To stop him once and for all, she would have to burn every bridge behind her. She activated the emergency broadcast on her phone, sending the evidence she'd gathered directly to every major news outlet in the city. It was the final piece, the catalyst that would expose everything. As Stone scrambled to stop her, Ella took one last step forward, pushing him into the line of fire from his own men. His face twisted with rage as the guards turned their weapons on him. In the chaos, Ella ran, melting into the night, knowing the fight wasn't truly over, but at least for now, she had won. The city erupted with news coverage as Ella watched from a safe house, her heart still racing. Marcus Stone had been exposed. His empire, built on lies, greed, and manipulation, collapsed in the wake of the evidence she'd released. The charity scandals, the offshore accounts, the hidden networks. It was all laid bare for the world to see. People were finally starting to demand answers, and the police had arrested some of Stone's closest allies. But as the days passed, Ella couldn't shake the hollowness inside her. She had sacrificed so much to bring the truth to light: her career, her safety, her personal relationships. Max was gone, unable to cope with the fallout from his own involvement, and Sarah, despite her help, had remained distant, still trying to rebuild her life outside the chaos. Even Ethan had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only a bitter sense of betrayal. As Ella reflected on what she'd lost, she couldn't deny the grim satisfaction of knowing that she had stopped a dangerous man. But it came at a cost. People would remember her as the one who brought down Marcus Stone, but they wouldn't know the depth of the personal sacrifices she'd made to get there. The phone buzzed on her desk, shattering her thoughts. A new case, a new mystery. Ella paused, staring at the message. The world hadn't changed as much as she'd hoped. It was still full of secrets and deception, and there were still people out there who needed her help. The truth had come out, but the war was far from over. With a weary sigh, Ella stood and walked toward the door, ready to face whatever came next. The truth is out, but the battle isn't over. Corruption runs deep, and Ella's fight has only just begun. Will she risk everything again to expose the next shadow lurking in the dark? Stay tuned. Justice comes at a price.